In a small suburban town where life moved at a steady pace, an incident unfolded one Friday evening that would shake the community to its core. It all started with Big Shaq, a towering yet gentle man who was deeply respected in his neighborhood. Known for his work as a basketball coach, he had dedicated years of his life to mentoring young athletes and teaching them not just the game, but also valuable lessons about discipline, teamwork, and respect. To those who knew him, Big Shaq wasn't just a coach. He was a role model, a father figure, and a symbol of hope. Standing at 6'8", Big Shaq's presence was hard to miss. Yet, despite his imposing height, he carried himself with humility and kindness. His deep laugh echoed through the gymnasium during practice sessions, and his warm smile made everyone feel welcome. On this particular Friday, after a grueling week of training drills and strategy meetings, Big Shaq decided it was time for some well-deserved family fun. He gathered his wife Lisa and their two teenage sons, Marcus and Jamal, and headed to the local movie theater to catch the latest blockbuster action film. The family arrived at the theater just before sunset, parking their car under the dim glow of streetlights. As they walked toward the entrance, laughter bubbled between them, filling the cool night air with joy. The boys teased each other about which superhero was stronger, while Lisa playfully rolled her eyes at their antics. Big Shaq chuckled softly, his large hand resting protectively on Marcus's shoulder. For once, there were no whistles blowing or sneakers squeaking against polished floors, just the simple pleasure of spending quality time together. Inside the theater lobby, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Families milled around, children clutching buckets of popcorn, couples whispering sweet nothings, and groups of friends debating over snacks. Big Shaq led his family to the concession stand, where they joined the line to grab sodas and candy. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, until Officer Greg Harper stepped into the picture. Harper was a seasoned police officer, though not exactly beloved by the community. Over the years, he had earned a reputation for having a short fuse and often resorting to aggressive tactics during routine traffic stops. Complaints about racial profiling followed him like shadows, but nothing stuck. Tonight, however, fate had something different in store. Earlier in the evening, someone had called 911 reporting a suspicious individual loitering near the ticket counter. Without much detail to go on, Harper responded to the vague report, arriving at the theater with a scowl etched across his face. As soon as Harper entered the crowded lobby, his eyes scanned the room, searching for anyone who might fit the caller's vague description. That's when his gaze landed on Big Shaq. Harper's expression hardened instantly. To him, Big Shaq's size and skin color somehow matched the ambiguous description of suspicious. Without so much as a word of greeting or inquiry, Harper marched straight toward the unsuspecting family. "Hey, you!" Harper barked loudly, his voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation. Heads turned, and the lively chatter in the lobby came to an abrupt halt. People froze mid-step, unsure of what was happening. Big Shaq, startled by the sudden shout, turned slowly to face the officer, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Sir?" he asked cautiously, raising his hands, slightly in a gesture of peace. "Is everything okay?" But Harper wasn't interested in explanations. His hand hovered dangerously close to the holster at his side as he took another step closer to Big Shaq. "Don't move!" Harper snapped, his tone dripping with hostility. "What are you doing here? Who are you with?" His questions came fast and accusatory, leaving no room for calm dialogue. Big Shaq tried to remain composed, though his heart began to race. "I'm here with my family," he replied evenly, gesturing toward Lisa and the boys who now stood frozen beside him. Lisa clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles turning white as fear gripped her. Marcus and Jamal exchanged wide-eyed glances, unsure of how to react. Harper ignored the explanation completely. Instead, he reached for his gun, pulling it out and pointing it directly at Big Shaq's chest. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people realized what was unfolding. Parents pulled their children behind them, shielding them from the sight. Some patrons fumbled for their phones, recording the scene as it escalated. Big Shaq's mind raced. He knew better than to make any sudden movements. Raising both hands higher, palms open, he spoke again, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Officer, I'm not doing anything wrong," he said firmly. "We're just here to watch a movie." Lisa couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pleaded with Harper. "Please, sir, put your gun down. He's with us. We're just trying to enjoy our evening." Her voice trembled, breaking the tense silence that hung heavy in the air. But Harper showed no signs of backing down. If anything, his aggression grew. He shouted commands, demanding identification and refusing to acknowledge the terrified family standing before him. Witnesses later recounted how Harper used racially charged language, adding insult to injury. The standoff stretched on for what felt like an eternity, every second charged with palpable tension. Finally, another officer arrived on the scene. This time, it was Officer Daniels, a younger cop known for his level-headed approach. Recognizing the volatility of the situation, Daniels quickly intervened, urging Harper to holster his weapon. After several tense moments, Harper reluctantly complied, though his glare never left Big Shaq. As the immediate danger subsided, murmurs of disbelief filled the lobby. People whispered among themselves, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. One woman approached Big Shaq afterward, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said softly. "You didn't deserve that." Though shaken, Big Shaq managed a small nod of gratitude. But deep down he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a much larger fight. Little did he realize that his ordeal would ignite a firestorm of outrage and activism, forcing the entire town, and eventually the nation, to confront uncomfortable truths about racism and accountability within law enforcement. The moment Officer Daniels managed to defuse the situation, the theater lobby erupted into a flurry of activity. Patrons who had been frozen in shock began to move again, some rushing to comfort Big Shaq and his family, others scrambling to leave the scene altogether. The air was thick with tension, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of anger and disbelief. How could something like this happen in a place as ordinary as a movie theater? For many, the incident felt surreal, like a scene ripped straight out of a dystopian drama rather than real life. Big Shaq's wife, Lisa, clung to her husband's arm, her body trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. Her sons, Marcus and Jamal, stood close together, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. They had never seen their father treated this way before. To them, he was invincible, a giant both on and off the court. But tonight, they saw him as vulnerable, reduced to standing with his hands raised while a gun was pointed at his chest. It was a sight that would haunt them for years to come. As the family huddled together trying to process what had just happened, Officer Daniels approached them cautiously. Unlike Harper, whose demeanor reeked of hostility, Daniels seemed genuinely apologetic. "Sir, ma'am, I'm so sorry you had to go through this," he said softly, keeping his voice low to avoid drawing more attention. "Can I get your information, so we can document what happened here?" Big Shaq nodded slowly, still processing the whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. He handed over his ID when asked, though his mind wasn't fully focused on the formalities. Instead, he kept replaying the events in his head, searching for answers. What had he done to provoke such aggression? Why had Harper singled him out? And most importantly, how could he ensure that no one else endured the same treatment? Meanwhile, the crowd around them buzzed with murmurs. Some people expressed outrage, calling Harper's actions unacceptable and racially motivated. Others simply stared in stunned silence, unable to comprehend why a routine night at the movies had turned into a nightmare. A few patrons stepped forward to offer their support, shaking Big Shaq's hand or patting him on the back. One elderly woman even hugged Lisa, whispering words of encouragement. "You're strong," she said firmly. "Stay strong." But not everyone was sympathetic. In the corner of the lobby, a small group of individuals muttered among themselves, defending Harper's behavior. "He was just doing his job," one man argued, crossing his arms defiantly. "How's an officer supposed to know who's suspicious and who isn't?" Another chimed in, saying, "If you don't want trouble, maybe don't look so intimidating." Their comments stung, cutting deeper than any physical confrontation ever could. Big Shaq overheard snippets of their conversation but chose not to engage. He knew arguing wouldn't change their minds, and besides, he had bigger battles to fight. Outside the theater, news of the confrontation spread like wildfire. Witnesses who had recorded the incident began uploading videos to social media platforms within minutes. The clips captured every harrowing detail: Harper barking orders, Big Shaq raising his hands in surrender, Lisa crying as she begged the officer to lower his weapon. Within hours, hashtags like tar justice for Big Shaq and tar racism in blue started trending online. People from all over the country weighed in, sharing stories of their own encounters with racial profiling and police brutality. The internet became a virtual town hall, buzzing with calls for accountability and reform. Local news outlets quickly picked up the story, sending reporters to the scene to gather first-hand accounts. By Saturday morning, headlines blared across newspapers and websites. Beloved coach targeted by racist cop at movie theater, and family night turns into nightmare. Was this incident about race? Journalists interviewed witnesses, many of whom described the encounter in vivid detail. One woman recounted how she feared Big Shaq might be shot right then and there. Another man recalled feeling helpless as he watched the standoff unfold. It was like watching a horror movie, he told reporters, except it was real. Back at home, Big Shaq struggled to find peace. Though physically unharmed, he couldn't shake the emotional toll of the incident. Sleep eluded him that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Harper's angry face and felt the cold weight of the gun aimed at his chest. Lisa stayed awake beside him, holding his hand and offering quiet reassurance. "We'll get through this," she whispered, though even she wasn't sure how. For Marcus and Jamal, the experience left scars too. At breakfast the next morning, neither boy spoke much, pushing their cereal around their bowls listlessly. When Big Shaq finally broke the silence, his voice was heavy with resolve. "Boys, listen to me," he said, looking each of them in the eye. "What happened last night, it shouldn't have happened. But we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Understand?" Both boys nodded solemnly, though their expressions betrayed a mix of confusion and sadness. They didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what their father was saying, but they trusted him implicitly. If anyone could turn pain into purpose, it was Big Shaq. By Sunday afternoon, protests began to form outside the local police department. Hundreds of residents gathered, holding signs that read "End Police Brutality" and "Accountability Now." Community leaders took turns addressing the crowd, urging them to remain peaceful but persistent. Among the speakers was Reverend Thompson, a prominent pastor known for his advocacy work. Standing atop a makeshift podium, he delivered a fiery sermon about justice and equality. "This isn't just about Big Shaq," he declared, his voice booming through a megaphone. "This is about every black man, woman, and child who has ever been made to feel less than human because of the color of their skin. We demand change, not tomorrow, not next week, but today." His words ignited a spark in the crowd, prompting cheers and applause. Protesters chanted slogans, their voices echoing through the streets. Cars honked in solidarity as they drove past, and passers-by stopped to join the demonstration. Even those who hadn't personally witnessed the incident felt compelled to stand with Big Shaq, recognizing the broader implications of what had occurred. As the protests gained momentum, pressure mounted on the police department to take action. Internal investigations were launched, scrutinizing not only Harper's conduct during the incident, but also his history as an officer. Records revealed a troubling pattern of complaints filed against him, ranging from excessive force to verbal abuse. Several victims came forward, recounting their own harrowing experiences with Harper. One woman described how he had pulled her over for a minor traffic violation, only to berate her with racial slurs. Another man shared how Harper had threatened to arrest him for questioning during a routine stop. These testimonies painted a damning portrait of an officer who operated with impunity, shielded by a system that failed to hold him accountable. Despite mounting evidence, initial attempts to discipline Harper fell short. Higher-ups within the department tried to downplay the incident, suggesting that his actions were justified given the vague 911 call. However, public backlash proved too intense to ignore. Leaked documents exposed how previous complaints against Harper had been swept under the rug, fueling accusations of institutional bias. Facing growing scrutiny, the chief of police had no choice but to act decisively. On Monday morning, Harper was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. While some viewed this as progress, others argued it wasn't enough. Protesters continued to rally, demanding nothing less than termination. Amidst the chaos, Big Shaq remained steadfast. He granted interviews to journalists, using his platform to shed light on systemic racism within law enforcement. During one particularly poignant segment, he addressed viewers directly, his voice filled with emotion. "This isn't the first time I've faced discrimination," he admitted, pausing to collect himself. "And it won't be the last unless we do something about it. This isn't just my fight, it's everyone's fight." His words resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to join the movement for justice. Behind the scenes, legal preparations were underway. Big Shaq met with a team of civil rights attorneys to discuss filing a lawsuit against Harper and the police department. Their goal extended beyond seeking damages. They aimed to implement policy changes that would prevent similar incidents in the future. From mandatory diversity training for officers to increased transparency in disciplinary actions, the proposed reform sought to address root causes rather than symptoms. As days turned into weeks, the ripple effects of that fateful Friday evening continued to reshape the town. Conversations about race and policing dominated dinner tables, classrooms, and community meetings. While tensions remained high, there were glimmers of hope. Neighbors who had previously avoided discussing uncomfortable topics now engaged in open dialogue. Local businesses pledged support for anti-racism initiatives, donating funds and resources to organizations working toward equity. Even within the police department, tentative steps toward reform began to emerge. For Big Shaq, life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, or as close to it as possible after such a traumatic experience. He resumed coaching, channeling his energy into mentoring young athletes and encouraging them to speak out against injustice. His story became a beacon of resilience, reminding others that courage often lies in standing firm despite fear. The days following the incident at the movie theater were a whirlwind for Big Shaq and his family. Life had been turned upside down, not just because of the traumatic event itself, but also due to the overwhelming attention it attracted. Reporters camped outside their home, eager to capture every word Big Shaq spoke. Neighbors stopped by unannounced, some offering heartfelt condolences while others simply wanted to gossip about what had happened. The constant scrutiny made it hard for the family to find even a moment of peace. Big Shaq tried to shield his wife and sons from the chaos as much as possible, but it was impossible to ignore the weight of public opinion crashing down on them. Lisa spent hours crying in private, her mind replaying Harper's threatening tone and the sight of that gun pointed at her husband. Marcus and Jamal withdrew into themselves, struggling to understand why something so unfair could happen to their dad. At school, they faced questions from classmates who had seen the videos online. Some kids teased them, calling their father the guy who got in trouble, while others offered awkward apologies. It was clear that the incident had left scars far beyond the immediate confrontation. Despite the emotional toll, Big Shaq refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into action. He began meeting regularly with civil rights attorneys, brainstorming ways to hold Officer Harper accountable and push for systemic change within the police department. These meetings often stretched late into the night, filled with discussions about legal strategies, policy reforms, and potential media campaigns. Big Shaq listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing insights drawn from his own experiences. Though he wasn't a lawyer or activist by profession, his natural leadership skills shone through, earning respect from everyone involved in the case. One key figure in these efforts was attorney Maya Patel, a seasoned civil rights advocate known for taking on high-profile cases involving police misconduct. She had built a reputation for being relentless in court, yet compassionate toward her clients. When she first met Big Shaq, she was struck by his calm demeanor, despite everything he'd endured. "You have a unique opportunity here," she told him during one of their early conversations. Your story has resonated with people across the country. We can use that momentum to demand real change, not just for you, but for countless others facing similar injustices. Maya outlined their plan step by step. First, they would file a lawsuit against both Officer Harper and the police department, alleging racial profiling, excessive force, and failure to address prior complaints against Harper. Next, they would push for policy reforms, including mandatory diversity training for all officers, stricter oversight mechanisms, and transparent disciplinary processes. Finally, they hoped to spark a national conversation about racism in law enforcement, leveraging Big Shaq's visibility to amplify marginalized voices. While preparations for the lawsuit moved forward, protests outside the police station grew, larger and more organized. What started as a small gathering of concerned citizens had evolved into a full-blown movement. Local activists collaborated with national organizations to coordinate rallies, marches, and educational workshops. Speakers ranged from grassroots leaders to celebrities who lent their platforms to the cause. Signs bearing slogans like "Justice for Big Shaq" and "Cops should protect, not threaten" became ubiquitous, plastered across social media feeds, and carried proudly in demonstrations. Among the protesters was Jasmine Carter, a young college student studying sociology. She had grown up hearing stories of racial injustice from her grandparents, who had lived through the civil rights movement. Watching the video of Harper pointing a gun at Big Shaq reignited her passion for activism. "This is our generation's fight," she declared during a rally, standing atop a makeshift stage. Her voice trembled with emotion but never wavered. "We can't sit back and watch history repeat itself. We need to stand together and say enough is enough." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, drawing cheers and applause. Many attendees nodded in agreement, holding their fists high in solidarity. Others recorded her speech on their phones, sharing it online to spread the message further. For Jasmine, this was more than just a protest. It was a chance to honor her ancestors' legacy and pave the way for future generations. Meanwhile, tensions within the police department reached a boiling point. Officers found themselves divided over how to handle the fallout from Harper's actions. Some defended him, arguing that he was simply doing his job under difficult circumstances. Others condemned his behavior, calling it reckless and unacceptable. Internal memos leaked to the press revealed heated debates among senior officials, with some pushing for leniency and others demanding swift punishment. The chief of police, caught between public outrage and internal politics, struggled to maintain control. In an effort to salvage the department's tarnished image, the chief announced a series of town hall meetings aimed at fostering dialogue between officers and community members. Flyers were distributed throughout the town, inviting residents to voice their concerns and suggestions. However, turnout for these events varied widely. In predominantly white neighborhoods, attendance was sparse, with many dismissing the meetings as unnecessary. But in communities of color, lines formed well before the doors opened, reflecting a deep desire for accountability and reform. At one such meeting, Big Shaq delivered a powerful speech that left the audience spellbound. Standing tall despite his fatigue, he recounted the events of that fateful night, emphasizing the fear and humiliation he felt when Harper drew his weapon. "I'm not here to hate," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I'm here to heal, to build bridges. Because if we don't come together now, nothing will ever change." His words earned a standing ovation, with many attendees rushing to shake his hand afterward. Back at home, Lisa watched the news coverage of the speech, tears streaming down her face. She knew how much courage it took for her husband to relive that trauma publicly, especially knowing that millions of people were watching. Yet she also recognized the importance of his message. "You're making a difference," she told him later that evening, wrapping her arms around him. "Not just for us, but for everyone." As weeks turned into months, progress began to emerge, albeit slowly. Public pressure forced the police department to take decisive action against Harper. After months of investigations and hearings, he was officially fired from his position. The decision came as a relief to many, though some argued it didn't go far enough. Protesters continued to call for criminal charges, insisting that firing Harper alone wouldn't erase the harm he had caused. For Big Shaq, the victory was bittersweet. While he celebrated the outcome, he remained acutely aware of the work still needed to address deeper issues within law enforcement. He threw himself into advocacy efforts, traveling to neighboring towns to speak at community forums and meet with lawmakers. His presence inspired others to share their own stories of discrimination, creating a domino effect of awareness and action. Even amid the challenges, moments of hope began to surface. One day, after a particularly grueling round of interviews, Big Shaq returned home to find a package waiting on his doorstep. Inside was a handwritten letter from a young boy named Elijah, accompanied by a drawing of a basketball court. "Dear Mr. Shaq," the note read, "thank you for standing up for what's right. You're my hero." The simplicity of the gesture touched Big Shaq deeply, reminding him why he kept fighting despite the odds. As time passed, the movement sparked by Big Shaq's ordeal gained traction nationwide. Cities across the country began implementing reforms, inspired by the policies proposed in his lawsuit. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within police departments. Activists credited Big Shaq with igniting a wave of change that showed no signs of slowing down. Through it all, Big Shaq remained grounded, focusing on the values that had guided him since childhood: kindness, resilience, and a commitment to justice. Though the road ahead was long, he faced it with unwavering determination. For him, this wasn't just about seeking retribution. It was about building a better future for his sons and for generations to come. Years later, when asked about that chaotic night at the movie theater, Big Shaq often reflected on how it shaped not only his life but also the lives of countless others. "Sometimes pain leads to purpose," he would say, his eyes softening with wisdom. "And sometimes standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, is the only way to make things better." The months following Officer Harper's termination marked a turning point, not just for Big Shaq and his family, but for the entire town. While some celebrated the decision as a step toward justice, others remained skeptical, questioning whether removing one problematic officer could truly address the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement. For Big Shaq, this was only the beginning of a much larger fight. He knew that firing Harper wouldn't erase years of racial bias or prevent similar incidents from happening again. Real change required more than accountability. It demanded transformation. With his lawsuit against the police department moving forward, Big Shaq threw himself into advocacy work with renewed energy. Every day brought new challenges, from navigating complex legal proceedings to addressing criticisms from those who dismissed his efforts as unnecessary drama. Yet despite the hurdles, he refused to back down. His determination inspired others to join the cause, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond his hometown. One of the most significant developments came when attorney Maya Patel announced plans to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of individuals who had previously been victims of Officer Harper's misconduct. Word spread quickly, prompting several people to come forward with their stories. Among them was Maria Alvarez, a single mother who recounted how Harper had pulled her over late one night, accusing her of driving recklessly without evidence. She described feeling terrified as he screamed at her in front of her young daughter, using derogatory language that left her shaken for weeks afterward. Another victim, James Peterson, shared how Harper had threatened to arrest him during a routine traffic stop simply because he questioned why he'd been pulled over. "It wasn't about safety," James said bitterly. "It was about power." These testimonies painted a damning picture of Harper's behavior, reinforcing the need for broader reforms within the police department. Maya and her team worked tirelessly to gather evidence, interview witnesses, and build a compelling case. Meanwhile, Big Shaq continued to use his platform to amplify these voices, ensuring they weren't ignored or forgotten. During interviews and public appearances, he emphasized that this wasn't just about him. It was about all those who had suffered in silence. As momentum grew, so did resistance. Critics argued that focusing on individual officers like Harper risked vilifying an entire profession, While others claimed the movement was politically motivated, some even accused Big Shaq of seeking fame rather than justice. These accusations stung, but he handled them with grace, refusing to engage in petty arguments. Instead, he focused on educating people about the realities of racial profiling and systemic racism. "If you've never walked in my shoes," he often said, "you can't understand what it feels like to be judged before you even speak." Behind the scenes, tensions simmered within the police department. Officers grappled with conflicting emotions. Some felt betrayed by Harper's actions, while others worried about becoming scapegoats for problems they didn't create. Morale plummeted as internal investigations intensified, scrutinizing not only Harper's conduct but also the department's handling of past complaints. Leaked documents revealed troubling patterns of misconduct, including cases where disciplinary actions had been delayed or ignored altogether. The revelations sparked heated debates among senior officials, with some advocating for transparency and others clinging to secrecy. Amidst the turmoil, Chief Daniels, the same officer who had intervened during the theater incident, emerged as a surprising ally. Recognizing the urgent need for reform, he began pushing for policy changes aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community. One of his first initiatives involved establishing a citizen oversight committee tasked with reviewing complaints against officers and recommending disciplinary actions. Members of the committee were carefully selected to represent diverse backgrounds, ensuring a wide range of perspectives. Chief Daniels also introduced mandatory diversity training programs designed to educate officers about implicit bias and cultural sensitivity. Though initially met with skepticism from rank-and-file members, the sessions gradually gained acceptance as participants realized their value. Role-playing exercises allowed officers to step into the shoes of marginalized individuals, helping them better understand the impact of their words and actions. For many, it was an eye-opening experience that challenged long-held assumptions. Outside the department, grassroots movements continued to gain traction. Activists organized workshops, teach-ins, and art exhibits to raise awareness about racial injustice. Local schools incorporated discussions about systemic racism into their curriculums, encouraging students to think critically about privilege and inequality. Even businesses joined the effort, pledging to support minority-owned enterprises and invest in underserved communities. For Big Shaq's sons, Marcus and Jamal, the changes unfolding around them were both inspiring and overwhelming. At school, they became reluctant symbols of resilience, with teachers and peers frequently asking about their father's activism. While proud of him, they struggled to reconcile their admiration with the lingering trauma of that night at the theater. Nightmares plagued them, replaying Harper's angry face and the sound of their mother's cries. Counseling sessions helped them process their emotions, but healing would take time. Lisa, too, faced her own battles. Though fiercely supportive of her husband's mission, she couldn't shake the fear that something worse might happen next time. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or taking the boys to basketball practice filled her with anxiety. She found solace in connecting with other families affected by similar experiences, forming bonds that provided strength and solidarity. Together, they formed a support group, sharing resources and strategies for coping with trauma. Despite the challenges, there were moments of hope that reminded everyone why they kept fighting. One such moment occurred during a community event hosted by the police department. Designed to foster dialogue and collaboration, the gathering featured panel discussions, interactive activities, and opportunities for residents to meet officers in a non-confrontational setting. Big Shaq attended alongside Lisa and the boys, eager to see firsthand how attitudes were shifting. During a Q&A session, a young girl named Ava approached the microphone, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. "Hi, Mr. Shaq," she began nervously, glancing up at him with wide eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for us. My daddy says you're making the world safer for kids like me." Her voice trembled, but her sincerity shone through. The room erupted in applause, leaving Big Shaq momentarily speechless. When he finally responded, his voice cracked with emotion. "Ava, your words mean everything to me," he said softly. "Keep believing in yourself. and know that we're all working together to make things better. Moments like these fueled Big Shaq's resolve, reminding him that every small victory mattered. As the lawsuit progressed, media coverage intensified, drawing national attention to the case. Journalists traveled from across the country to document the unfolding drama, interviewing experts, activists, and ordinary citizens alike. Documentaries explored the intersection of race, policing, and justice, shedding light on systemic issues often overlooked in mainstream discourse. Social media campaigns amplified these narratives, reaching audiences worldwide. Yet, amidst the praise and recognition, Big Shaq remained humble. He understood that true change required collective effort, not individual heroics. That's why he prioritized collaboration, partnering with organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform and racial equity. Together, they drafted proposals for legislative changes, lobbied lawmakers, and mobilized voters to demand accountability from elected officials. By the end of the year, progress was undeniable. The police department implemented sweeping reforms, including body cameras for all officers, stricter guidelines for use of force incidents, and regular audits of disciplinary records. Citizen oversight committees gained traction nationwide, with cities adopting similar models to increase transparency and accountability. Meanwhile, Big Shaq's lawsuit set a precedent, paving the way for future cases involving police misconduct. Still, Big Shaq knew the journey was far from over. Systemic racism couldn't be dismantled overnight. It required sustained commitment and vigilance. But for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel optimistic. Change was slow, messy, and imperfect, but it was happening. And as long as people continued to stand together, united in their pursuit of justice, there was hope for a brighter future. Years later, when reflecting on the events that unfolded, Big Shaq often thought about how one moment, a single decision, could alter the course of countless lives. That night at the theater had tested him in ways he never imagined, forcing him to confront fears he didn't know he had. Yet, it also revealed his strength, resilience, and capacity to inspire others. Through pain and perseverance, he had discovered a purpose greater than himself, a mission to create a world where no one else had to endure what he did. "It's not about revenge," he would say during speeches, his voice steady yet filled with conviction. "It's about building bridges, about teaching our children that kindness matters more than fear, that understanding is stronger than hatred, and that justice isn't just a dream." Months turned into years, and the impact of Big Shaq's ordeal continued to shape not only his life, but also the lives of countless others. The lawsuit against the police department had finally reached its conclusion after a grueling legal battle that tested everyone's patience and resolve. In a landmark decision, the court ruled in favor of Big Shaq and the other plaintiffs, ordering the department to pay substantial damages and implement sweeping reforms. For many, this verdict felt like a long overdue acknowledgement of systemic failures, a validation of their pain and perseverance. The ruling sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. It wasn't just about holding one officer accountable. It was a wake-up call for departments everywhere to examine their practices and policies. News outlets covered the decision extensively, framing it as a turning point in the fight against racial profiling and police misconduct. Experts hailed it as a rare instance where grassroots activism successfully influenced institutional change. But for Big Shaq, the victory was bittersweet. While he celebrated the outcome, he couldn't shake the knowledge that no amount of money or policy reform could erase the trauma endured by those affected, including himself. In the weeks following the verdict, Big Shaq found himself reflecting deeply on what lay ahead. The legal battle may have ended, but the work of advocacy never truly did. He knew that sustaining momentum required more than winning cases. It demanded ongoing education, dialogue, and action. With this in mind, he partnered with attorney Maya Patel and several community leaders to launch an organization called Bridges Beyond Bias. The nonprofit aimed to address systemic racism at its roots, offering workshops, mentorship programs, and resources for marginalized communities. Its mission statement was simple yet powerful: to create a world where everyone is seen, heard, and valued. Big Shaq threw himself into the project with characteristic enthusiasm. He traveled across the country, speaking at schools, conferences, and town halls, sharing his story and urging audiences to confront uncomfortable truths. His talks were raw and honest, blending humor with heartbreak to connect with listeners on a personal level. At one such event, held in a packed auditorium in Chicago, a young man named Elijah stood up during the Q&A session. Clutching a basketball, jersey signed by Big Shaq months earlier, Elijah asked, "How do you stay strong when people keep telling you it's hopeless?" Big Shaq paused, considering the question carefully before responding. "Hope isn't something you find," he said slowly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's something you build. Every time we stand together, every time we refuse to give up, that's hope. And trust me, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against us, there's power in numbers. There's power in believing we can make things better." His words resonated deeply, drawing thunderous applause from the audience. Moments like these reminded him why he kept fighting. Not for recognition or revenge, but for the belief that collective effort could spark meaningful change. Back home, Lisa noticed subtle shifts in her husband's demeanor. Though still burdened by memories of that night at the theater, he seemed lighter somehow, as if carrying the weight of advocacy alongside others made it easier to bear. She marveled at his ability to channel pain into purpose, often joining him at events to lend her support. Together, they became a formidable team, inspiring others to take action in their own communities. For Marcus and Jamal, growing up in the shadow of their father's activism shaped their worldview profoundly. They learned early on that privilege came with responsibility, that using their voices to speak out against injustice was not optional, but essential. Both boys excelled academically, earning scholarships to prestigious universities. Marcus pursued a degree in sociology, while Jamal gravitated toward journalism, determined to tell stories that mattered. Their achievements filled Big Shaq with immense pride, though he reminded them often that success wasn't measured solely by accolades. What matters most, he told them, is how you treat people and whether you leave the world better than you found it. As Bridges Beyond Bias gained traction, partnerships flourished. Corporations donated funds to support educational initiatives, while celebrities amplified the organization's message through social media campaigns. Local governments collaborated with the nonprofit to develop training modules for public servants, emphasizing empathy, accountability, and cultural competence. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift, not universally, but enough to signal progress. Still, resistance persisted. Critics accused Big Shaq of being too idealistic, arguing that systemic racism was too entrenched to dismantle entirely. Others dismissed his efforts as performative, claiming that real change required more than speeches and workshops. To these detractors, Big Shaq responded with quiet determination. "Change starts somewhere," he said during an interview. "If we wait for perfect conditions, nothing will ever happen. So yes, it's messy. Yes, it's hard. But giving up isn't an option. Not when lives are at stake." Amidst the challenges, moments of triumph continued to emerge. One particularly poignant milestone occurred when Chief Daniels announced the creation of a memorial fund in honor of victims of police brutality. Named after Big Shaq's case, the fund provided financial assistance to families impacted by similar incidents, ensuring they wouldn't face economic hardship while seeking justice. During the unveiling ceremony, Chief Daniels acknowledged his department's past mistakes, pledging to lead by example moving forward. "We owe it to our community to do better," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "And we will." For Big Shaq, the gesture symbolized more than reconciliation. It represented accountability. He shook Chief Daniels' hand warmly, grateful for the collaborative spirit driving their efforts. Though wary of celebrating prematurely, he recognized the significance of small victories along the way. Meanwhile, grassroots movements inspired by Big Shaq's journey sprouted in cities nationwide. Activists organized marches, vigils, and art exhibits to honor those who had lost their lives to police violence. Murals depicting Big Shaq's likeness appeared on walls, accompanied by messages of resilience and unity. These visual tributes served as reminders of the progress achieved and the work still needed to ensure lasting change. One evening, as Big Shaq sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on how far they'd come since that fateful night at the theater. Life hadn't returned to normal, how could it? But it had evolved into something richer, fuller. Pain had given way to purpose, fear to faith. He thought about the countless individuals who had shared their stories with him, trusting him to amplify their voices. He thought about the activists, lawyers, teachers, and students working tirelessly behind the scenes. And he thought about his family, whose love and support anchored him through every storm. Lisa joined him on the porch, handing him a cup of tea. "You've done so much," she said softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever feel like it's enough?" Big Shaq smiled faintly, gazing out at the horizon. "It's never enough," he admitted. "Not until every kid grows up feeling safe. Not until no one has to wonder if they'll be treated differently because of the color of their skin. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. We keep building bridges, one step at a time." Years later, historians would look back on this era as a pivotal moment in the struggle for racial justice. Textbooks chronicled Big Shaq's role in sparking national conversations about policing and inequality, highlighting his courage and compassion. Documentaries captured his journey, weaving interviews with archival footage to paint a vivid portrait of resilience. Yet, for all the accolades and recognition, Big Shaq remained grounded, focusing on the everyday actions that defined his legacy. He returned to coaching, pouring his energy into mentoring young athletes and instilling values of integrity and empathy. On rainy days, he gathered his players in the gym, teaching them not just dribbling techniques but also lessons about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. "Being brave isn't about being fearless," he told them. "It's about doing the right thing even when you're scared." Through it all, Big Shaq carried a quiet certainty that change was possible. Not overnight, not perfectly, but incrementally, persistently. He understood that true justice required more than laws or policies. It demanded a shift in hearts and minds. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, he faced it with unwavering hope. Because sometimes, standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, is the only way to make things better. And for Big Shaq, that truth was worth fighting. For years had passed since that fateful night at the movie theater, but its echoes continued to reverberate through Big Shaq's life and the lives of those around him. The world had changed in ways both subtle and profound, thanks in no small part to the ripple effects of his courage and resilience. What began as a personal ordeal had grown into a national movement, inspiring countless individuals to confront injustice and demand accountability. For Big Shaq, the journey was far from over, but it had transformed into something greater than he ever imagined. By now, Bridges Beyond Bias had become a household name, synonymous with hope and progress. The organization had expanded its reach globally, partnering with international groups to address systemic racism and inequality on a broader scale. Workshops designed by the nonprofit were being implemented in schools, corporations, and government agencies, fostering understanding and empathy across diverse communities. Big Shaq traveled less frequently these days, delegating responsibilities to a dedicated team of volunteers and staff members. Yet his presence remained central to the mission, symbolizing the power of perseverance and unity. One of the most significant milestones came when Congress passed landmark legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement. Dubbed the Justice for All Act, the bill mandated nationwide adoption of body cameras, established independent oversight committees, and required departments to publicly disclose disciplinary records. Though not without opposition, the legislation marked a historic step toward reform, a testament to years of advocacy led by activists like Big Shaq. When President Martinez signed the bill into law during a ceremony attended by civil rights leaders, Big Shaq stood proudly among them, his towering frame drawing attention even in a room filled with dignitaries. "This is more than just policy," Big Shaq said during a press conference following the event. It's a promise to our children, to future generations, that we're committed to doing better, that we won't settle for anything less than fairness and equality for everyone. His words resonated deeply, earning applause from lawmakers and citizens alike. Social media erupted with praise, with hashtags like #JusticeForAllAct trending worldwide. Critics still voiced concerns about implementation challenges, but the overwhelming sentiment was one of optimism. Back in his hometown, the impact of these changes became increasingly visible. The local police department underwent a dramatic transformation, adopting many of the reforms championed by Chief Daniels and supported by community leaders. Officers participated in regular training sessions focused on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and implicit bias awareness. Citizen advisory boards played an active role in reviewing complaints and recommending disciplinary actions, ensuring transparency and trust. Crime rates dropped significantly, attributed partly to improved relationships between law enforcement and residents. Big Shaq often visited the department to speak with officers, sharing insights drawn from his experiences. He emphasized the importance of seeing people as human beings first, not threats or statistics. When you approach someone with respect, he told them, you open doors instead of closing them. You build trust instead of fear. Many officers appreciated his perspective, recognizing that meaningful change required mutual effort. At home, life settled into a rhythm of purpose and fulfillment. Lisa thrived in her role as co-founder of Bridges Beyond Bias, organizing fundraising events and coordinating outreach programs. Her warmth and organizational skills complemented Big Shaq's charisma, creating a dynamic partnership that inspired others to join their cause. Marcus and Jamal, now young adults pursuing careers in social justice and journalism respectively, frequently collaborated with their parents, bringing fresh ideas and energy to the table. Family dinners buzzed with lively discussions about current events, strategies for advocacy, and plans for the future. Despite the progress, reminders of the past lingered. On quiet nights, Big Shaq sometimes found himself replaying the events of that night at the theater. The memory of Harper's gun pointed at his chest never fully faded, nor did the sound of Lisa's desperate pleas. Yet rather than letting these recollections haunt him, he channeled them into motivation. They served as a stark reminder of why the fight mattered and why giving up was never an option. In 2027, Big Shaq received an unexpected honor. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. The nomination recognized his tireless efforts to combat racial injustice and promote reconciliation worldwide. News of the accolade spread quickly, sparking celebrations in his hometown and beyond. Supporters flooded social media with messages of congratulations, while critics questioned whether such recognition was warranted. To Big Shaq, however, the nomination wasn't about validation. It was about amplifying the message further. I didn't start this journey seeking awards, he said humbly during an interview. I started because I wanted my sons, and every child, to grow up in a world where they don't have to fear being judged by the color of their skin. If this nomination helps shine a light on that goal, then I'm grateful. Though he didn't win the prize that year, the nomination elevated his profile even higher, opening doors to new opportunities for advocacy. He addressed the United Nations General Assembly, delivering a powerful speech about the intersection of race, justice, and humanity. We are all connected, he declared, his voice steady yet passionate. What affects one of us affects us all. And until we acknowledge that truth, we cannot truly move forward. His words struck a chord, earning standing ovations and prompting pledges of support from global leaders. Bridges Beyond Bias received unprecedented funding, allowing the organization to expand its initiatives exponentially. New chapters sprouted, in countries grappling with similar issues, adapting strategies to fit local contexts while maintaining core principles of equity and inclusion. As the years rolled on, Big Shaq's legacy solidified. Textbooks included sections about his contributions to civil rights movements, highlighting his role as a catalyst for change. Documentaries chronicled his journey, blending archival footage with interviews featuring family members, colleagues, and beneficiaries of his work. Statues honoring him appeared in parks and public spaces, serving as enduring symbols of resilience and hope. Yet for all the recognition, Big Shaq remained remarkably grounded. He continued coaching basketball, finding joy in mentoring young players and teaching them lessons about character and integrity. On rainy afternoons, he gathered his team in the gym, sharing stories about overcoming adversity and staying true to one's values. Life will throw challenges your way, he told them. But how you respond defines who you are. Choose kindness. Choose courage. Choose to make a difference. Lisa often joked that retirement would never suit him. You'll be out there, speaking and organizing until the day you can't walk anymore, she teased affectionately. But deep down, she admired his relentless spirit, knowing that his passion stemmed from love for his family, his community, and humanity itself. Decades later, when reflecting on his life's work, Big Shaq often thought about the ripple effect of that single moment at the theater. It had tested him in ways he never anticipated, forcing him to confront fears and doubts. Yet, it also revealed his strength, resilience, and capacity to inspire others. Through pain and perseverance, he had discovered a purpose greater than himself, a mission to create a world where everyone could thrive without fear of discrimination or harm. It's not about me, he liked to say during speeches, his voice soft but filled with conviction. It's about us, about the bridges we build together, about the lives we touch and the futures we shape. And if my story can remind even one person that they have the power to make a difference, then I've done my job. And so, Big Shaq carried on, driven not by anger or bitterness but by love, for his family, his community, and the generations yet to come. His story served as a beacon of hope, reminding others that even in the darkest times, courage and compassion could light the way forward. It wasn't easy and it certainly wasn't quick, but it was worth it. Because sometimes standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, is the only way to make things better.